China has responded to Europe's, imposing taxes on Chinese electric cars. Now, it's not just Chinese brands. Tesla does have a tax imposed on its cars as well, which is 9%, but that's a lot lower than what BYD is paying at about 18%, Geely about 19%, and government-owned MG, which pays 37.5%. There is an additional 10% import tax as well on all cars, not just Chinese cars, but all cars coming from any country worldwide, meaning add 10% to all those numbers, Tesla pays 19%, BYD pays about 28%. The tariffs are pretty high. Chinese government says this is protectionism, this is not fair, it's illegal, and they're responding with their own, retaliation, you might say. This actually might hurt Europe economically more than they realize. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the channel. I'm Sam Evans. You're watching The Electric Viking. Fantastic to have you with us. I want to say a big thank you to our Patreon supporters and YouTube members, guys. Really appreciate your support. If you can support the channel, I'll put a link in the description below. That'd be great. 27 EU member states apparently have, China says, there's 20 subsidy schemes in 27 different European countries. 20 subsidy schemes that are put in place to apparently subsidize Europe's dairy industry. Now, China doesn't really have much of a dairy industry. It imports most of its dairy from Australia, New Zealand, and Europe. And China is saying, well, okay, we know we're giving you billions of dollars to your dairy industry. We are going to essentially find out whether or not you are getting subsidies. Now, of course they are. Of course, to be honest, people are very naive and very emotional about all this stuff. And I'm not saying that I agree with China here, not by any means, but I'm just saying, be objective. Objectively speaking, most industries are subsidized, whether that's in Australia or whether that's in Europe or whether that's in America. Most industries do receive some form of subsidies. In fact, there's still massive subsidies being paid for fossil fuels. Most countries worldwide are still paying massive subsidies to any fossil fuel company, as long as that company is based in their own country. So even for coal miners, they still get subsidies from the government. All of this stuff is, you do this for us, we do this for you. You send that overseas, that makes us look better, we'll pay you more. That's very, very normal for the industry. And I think that's kind of why China is outraged. They're saying, hang on a minute, we're doing what everyone else has been doing for decades, but now you're saying it's not fair. However, the point I think Europe is making is it's the scale of the subsidies. The Chinese government have poured in a lot more money over the last decade into its automotive industry than, the government of Europe has into its own automotive industry, or potentially to what the United States has. Now, that may not be true in the case of the United States. They have certainly subsidized their own automotive industry enormously. But anyway, the US does what it wants. The Ministry of China, the MOC in China, has rebuked the European Union's tariff changes. They say that they are firmly opposed to and highly concerned about Europe's findings from their anti-subsidy probe on EV imports made in China. The MOC compared its own probe on Europe's dairy products. Now, China is not just doing a probe on Europe's dairy, it's also doing it on its wine. Wine is one of the top 3 exports from France. So, really the truth is France doesn't buy many Chinese electric cars, a very small number. France, at least initially, will lose more money from their subsidies that are going to be imposed on imports, or exports, I should say, of French wines to China, because that's an enormous industry for France. Whereas the EV industry, China selling EVs to France is a very, very tiny industry. Now that, of course, will have different ramifications as the years go on. But initially, this will be a much bigger hit to France than what it will be to China. China is basically saying, we are basically the world's biggest economy in a number of ways. I know in some ways they're not, but that's America, but in other ways they are. We can damage you more than what you can damage us. And that's what they're going to do. Well, that's what they plan on doing. A spokesperson from the Ministry of Commerce emphasized the difference between Europe and China's anti-subsidy probes on select exports. The MOC spokesperson pointed out that the Commission's investigation was launched without an application from an EU member state, whereas China's anti-subsidy probe was launched after the Dairy Association of China And the China Dairy Industry Association submitted an application to the Chinese government for an investigation to start. Basically, the Chinese government are saying that the European Union has broken World Trade Organization rules and that their subsidy probes are illegal. That's what China is saying. They're using all this different rhetoric to explain that that's their position. I honestly think it's ridiculous. I don't know why China's bothering with this stuff. I mean, as if Europe's going to read all this jargon from China and go, oh, yeah, you're right. Okay, sorry, we'll reverse all the tariffs now. Europe's very well aware of all these rules. I'm sure they've looked at them all in detail, and they don't give a shit about any of this stuff. They're afraid they're going to lose their automotive industry. It's the biggest employer in Europe still. You got to remember, it's not just direct jobs, it's all the supporting jobs. The automotive industry is enormous. So they're afraid of this, and you can see why. And Europe's not going to go, oh, yeah, right. So according to point number 27C in the World Trade Organization rules, we broke the rules. Okay, yeah, sure, China, we're going to revert on. So I'm not sure why China keeps doing this. But anyway, they're unhappy. They are going to fight back against this. They will impose significant tariffs on exports from Europe to China. It'll be a tit-for-tat scenario. And remember that when it comes to game theory, what is the best strategy? What is the best strategy in game theory? Well, thousands of simulations have been run on game theory, and people used to think it was tit-for-tat. Tit-for-tat was the best strategy for game theory, right? You whack me in the face, I whack you in the face. And it just keeps on going and going. And actually, it did appear that tit for tat, after thousands of, in fact, hundreds of thousands of simulations, was the best strategy. But actually, it's not. The reality is, tit for tat, where every now and then, say every 10 hits, you don't slap the other person in the face. You say, it's all right, I'm going to overlook what you just did. That's actually the best strategy when it comes to game theory. Now, right now, China and Europe, they're in a tit-for-tat scenario. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. Will one of them potentially follow the absolute best version of game theory and actually forgive the other one at any point in time and move on? Well, I don't think so. I don't see it playing out that way, but who knows? Let's wait and see. What are your thoughts? Thanks for watching.